Hello, English 423 and 523 students. As you can see, I am back home in Huntington, West Virginia, talking to you from what I use as a study, which is actually a guest bedroom in our house. And today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about Jack London. Jack London is a complicated character and writer. He is a difficult one oftentimes to have strong feelings about one way or another. He is accurately described as a progressive, a primitivist, and a racist. There's no way of getting around that last piece. Jack London has said, and he's quoted as saying, that he is a socialist, but he is a white man first. So he is very much someone who is attuned to the oppressive and exploitative elements of American capitalism, but he doesn't mind if the person being exploited is African American. He is also incredibly problematic even from that standpoint, because as a primitivist, you often get the sense that Jack London likes animals more than people, but when he dehumanizes another person, that just puts him on the lowest plane of existence possible. So all one has to do is read his reportage of Jack Johnson's prize fights during London's career as a newspaper reporter, and you get a very strong sense of just how virulent his racism is. So how do we deal with someone like that? Someone who in many ways is a beautiful artist, but an incredibly flawed and limited human being. I'll also say that progressivism and racism during this point in American history are not at odds with each other at all. Woodrow Wilson, who is thought of as this anti-war progressive American Democrat, was clearly a racist and was probably a member of the Ku Klux Klan. Henry Ford, who was a major political candidate at the time, was also a major supporter of the Nazis and the Ku Klux Klan. So being progressive, being nationalistic, none of these things can get in the way of one's inherent flaws as a human being. But what do I want you to think about? In the context of these two stories, the racism doesn't become very clear. One's set in Australia, one's set in Alaska. There are a couple of things that I want you to pay attention to with his work that are influential and important, even if he is a troubling character. The first of all is this idea of primitivism. And primitivism is where naturalism and realism basically draw a line from Romanticism, an idea or a concept from Romanticism. This comes back from Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who is famous for talking about how society is inherently a corruptive influence, that society corrupts. And one can definitely see that in Jack London's work, where repeatedly we see civilization being sort of the large antagonist of his works. Definitely see it in To Build a Fire, where a character is actually the arrogance that comes from civilization, which is represented by his book of matches that he has so much faith in, and his scheduling and his position. All these things actually blind him, give him a false sense of superiority and security that, I won't give you spoilers, but ultimately causes him a great deal of trouble. And one gets a sense that if this man had just was more in tune with his natural side, more in tune with his animal side, more in tune with his instincts, more willing to trust and pay attention to the dog that's by his side, and reading that animal, or instead of simply trying to control it and abuse it, then the outcome of that story would be very different. A Piece of Steak is a bit of a different story, but it also deals with, in a more subtle way, the corrupting influences of society. If one thinks about it, the whole conception of a prize fight or a prize fighter is really a grotesque sort of effect of civilization. And why do we fight? Why do we learn to fight? What is that fighting instinct about? Well, it's about survival and preservation. And it's very Darwinian. Strongest will survive. But in a civilized society where there are fewer opportunities or needs to sort of protect yourself physically, prize fighting, quite literally, prize fighting becomes spectacle. It becomes entertainment. And it also becomes a trap in much the way that we see NFL figures playing football, and they have these very short, like 7-year careers where they have to make all of their money, and then when it's over, they have very little to fall back on, and oftentimes have CT and are deteriorated. One can look at that as an inherently exploitive industry, one that really does seem to prey upon mostly, as does the military, on minorities and the poor, people who have to find alternative means to succeed and get by in society because they don't have opportunities, the same opportunities that everyone else has. From their point of view in their little place in the world, they develop a skill set, and then they have to do the best they can, hustling to survive based on that skill set. The tragedy, of course, of a piece of steak is that time always wins. Time is undefeated. The human body breaks down. With the possible exception of Tom Brady, the rest of us get older. I have a torn rotator cuff, can't really throw a ball anymore. I've got back problems, knee problems. The 40s are rough, man. And here we see a prize fighter that is simply trying to survive. And of course, we can look at the choices he has made and say, well, he could have done something differently, or he could have gone into a different field. But privilege is about opportunity. It's about having those not just the resources to pursue other avenues, but having those other avenues, being led towards those other avenues, having examples of people in your life who take those paths and know them. Why am I a college professor? Well, my father was an English professor and had 2 master's degrees. Why am I a writer and a musician? My mother was a ballet dancer. And plus I grew up in a suburban home right outside of Boston, where I had all the opportunities to do all of the things that I wanted to do. We weren't wealthy, we had enough, and we never had so little that I couldn't pursue the things that I was interested in. The less you have, the more limited your opportunities are. And I think that when London looks at civilization and capitalism, he sees a world where increasingly few people have the opportunities to break out of these cycles of poverty, exploitation, and degradation that the rest of us experience. He does seem to take a great deal of glee, especially in To Build a Fire, of taking the stuffing out of those who are arrogant, but he has a great deal of sympathy for those who are exploited by Western capitalism. Again, none of this absolves him of his flaws, which are deep and terrifying, especially in the context of the time period we're looking at. We're leading up to these moments in world history where nationalism and racism and anti-Semitism are going to cause greater and greater violence across the world. London's worldview is incredibly problematic and hypocritical. The wealthier he got, the more progressive he got, and it certainly wasn't communist enough to give up his own wealth or his own riches. So there's still a lot we can learn from London. There's still a lot of power in his work, especially To Build a Fire is incredibly powerful, and A Piece of Steak is incredibly moving. And when he writes about the natural world, he writes about it with a sensitivity and empathy that very few can match. If you have not read the Call of the Wild books, which are are really young adult novels, or White Fang, I would strongly suggest that you take a little time to check those out. London is at his best when he doesn't have to deal with too many people. All right. Hope this is somewhat helpful in getting you to think about the terms. So remember London, socialism, progressivism, but also this conception of primitivism, which is largely this idea that civilization is inherently corrupting towards human beings, separates them from their nature, both lower N and big N, and actually can create a sort of a cotton gauze around us by which we become further and further separated from the things that would help us to survive in the world, and we come to a point where we know ourselves less and less and less, and that this ultimately is very dangerous to us as a species, as we take our basic instincts, or even our baser instincts, and try to monetize them, or try to use money so that we don't need them anymore. We create a very dangerous and threatening and exploitive world. All right, that's all I have for you today. Speak to you again tomorrow. Oh, and please remember that every Wednesday and almost every Friday we have you have something due. Wednesday is a discussion board. Friday the reading response. If you're not doing something on a Wednesday or Friday, you're probably falling behind in the course. So keep up. All right. Talk to you tomorrow.